teamfight tactics is taking the League community by storm, it's time to cover more lore. If you've seen our last lore video, you'd know that there is no doubt that Mordekaiser changed the course of history. But I would be lying if I said that he was the only important character during his age. Remember that at the same time, Vladimir was also secretly rising to power. And together with him, there was also the person we are going to talk about today. So, not only are we going to cover the base story of LeBlanc, together with her short story, but we also need to talk about Mordekaiser again. With his release, Riot updated Mordekaiser's short story too, which means that the old story that we covered at the end of the last video is technically not canon anymore. And because YouTube doesn't allow me to edit out half of an already uploaded video, why don't we cover the new story today as well? So without further ado, let's start with LeBlanc. LeBlanc is the mistress of illusions. No one really knows her real identity, and she makes sure no one knows who she is for her own safety, because she is the matron of the Black Rose. Even though the Black Rose currently takes place in Noxus, it is a Cabal organization that existed far longer than the Noxian Empire itself. It was always scheming from the shadows, manipulating the rich and powerful. Though most cultists never learn the origins of their matron, many know the legends of a pale sorceress who aided the broken barbarian tribes. It was because of her that the barbarians formed an alliance, and together they took down the infamous Iron Revenant. This is important to us, because even though it was never directly confirmed before, now we got it finally confirmed that LeBlanc is indeed the Pale Lady, which is a character you may remember primarily from Swain's story. Since LeBlanc had her pawns even inside Mordekaiser's inner circle, it was easy for her to set up a betrayal. But simply destroying Mordekaiser's physical vessel wouldn't do. She had to neutralize the source of his power, which was the Immortal Bastion itself. Deep below the Bastion there was something called the Well of Death. This was the real source of Mordekaiser's power. And it was this well that LeBlanc had to seal away. In the end she succeeded, but she never locked it away completely. Since LeBlanc was the mistress of illusions, her greatest trick was to make Noxus forget any of this ever happened. A couple of generations later, Noxus forgot about the dark power that roiled in its own heart. And together with that, all mentions of LeBlanc herself were burned from the pages of history, around the time of the Rune Wars. The Black Rose exists now to keep the dark powers in check. Occasionally, a new member joins the cult, usually a mundane noble that could be exploited in the future. But even the most powerful military commanders could only ever serve the cult's true masters, as they fight one another for influence, both in the capital and beyond its borders. For centuries, LeBlanc had served in secret as an advisor to high-ranked officers in other nations, and usually her illusions appeared in many nations at once. By doing this, she makes sure no one really knows which one is the true version of herself. The latest victim of LeBlanc's manipulations was Borem Darkwill, the previous Grand General of Noxus. Even though the Black Rose supported Darkwill's claim to the throne, he refused to listen to the council of their hand-picked advisors, which forced LeBlanc to take drastic measures. She had to manipulate Jericho Swain into revealing the Black Rose, and she even allowed herself to be executed along with other important cultists. Or at least, so it appeared. Of course, it was just another illusion. And in time, LeBlanc reached out to Darkwill herself, and she found out that Darkwill became more and more paranoid. He was afraid of his own mortality. LeBlanc knew the promise of extended life would be like a poison to Darkwill's mind, and so it was easy for her to manipulate Darkwill into starting a war with Ionia. Together, LeBlanc and Darkwill plotted to end Swain's legacy there in the foreign lands. What LeBlanc did not expect, however, is that Swain would be emboldened by the forbidden lore from within the Immortal Bastion. And not only did he manage to survive the invasion of Ionia, he also destroyed Borem Darkwill, and he seized Noxus for himself. But Swain wasn't interested in his own legacy, he was interested in the glory of the Empire. And such man could not so easily be corrupted. That's how LeBlanc finally found a worthy foe. Her short story called Thorns of the Black Rose depicts how exactly LeBlanc manipulates high-ranked generals, and it reveals how her illusions work. So let's dive into that now. Right at the start, the story introduces a character, General Grant. Now, if you have a really good memory, you may remember General Grant from the short story of Swain. It was the story called The Black Powder Plot. And if you remember what happened there, you know how awesome this story is about to get. Because of this reference, we know that the story happens months before the present day. It is told from LeBlanc's point of view. She was toying with Grant. She sent him down into the catacombs that were now forbidden by the order of the council. Ever since Swain seized control, he kept the bastion locked down. Officially, it was to protect the Triforix against those noble houses that opposed its creation. Unofficially, Swain knows that those who enter these forbidden catacombs expose themselves as enemies. Even so, Grant continued lower and lower. LeBlanc whispered into his ears, disguised as Grant's cousin. She assured him that he was the hero of the Gates of Mourning, and as an honored hero, no one would question why he's down there. But Grant knew it wasn't him who won the Battle of the Gates of Mourning. It was Swain's Legion. All the other soldiers didn't even need to be there. The Legion would have won regardless. That's why Swain wouldn't even join the celebrations. That's the alleged truth that drove Grant into delving down here. He hated Swain. Then, still disguised as his cousin, LeBlanc once again assured Grant that he is a true Noxian, and that even she wanted to meet him. After a while, they arrived before the yawning mouth of the gate in the darkness. Grant almost dropped his lantern in surprise. This was the first time he saw it. Before they continued through, Grant questioned if what they say about her is true, to which LeBlanc in disguise suggested that he should find out for himself. As they walked through the gate, anonymous figures passed by them, going in the other direction. Grant asked the person he knew as his cousin who they were. He learned that all of them shared the same goal. They wanted to see the downfall of the usurper, and that it was better to not know their names or their faces. Grant questioned this logic. How was he supposed to work with them when he didn't even know anything about them? But all the questions died in his throat when they approached the Great Well of Souls. It lit the room with hues of cold blues and jealous greens. Suspended above the well was a silhouette that every Noxian knows only too well. A husk of lifeless armor depicted in every history book. At that point, Grant had a meltdown. He couldn't believe what he saw. The truth behind the great empire of Noxus. LeBlanc leaned close to confirm his fears. As it had been for centuries, no Grand General, no Emperor or Tyrant can stand unless the Mistress of the Immortal Bastion allows it. Then LeBlanc carefully guided Grant away from the side that had paralyzed him, and towards the veiled tombs that lined the passage on either side. Swain must fall, she continued, and their cabal was ready to sacrifice everything to achieve it. After that, LeBlanc pulled back one of the shrouds, and there he was, the desecrated body of Hadrian, Grant's cousin. Somehow, Grant expected this. He realized that the person next to him was the Pale Lady. And he didn't even flinch when a second Pale Lady approached him. She was everywhere, she was everyone. Grant's father and the rest of his family were slaughtered because they stayed loyal to Borem Darkwill. Hadrian gave his life gladly in pursuit of revenge. All the Pale Lady asked for was to make sure their sacrifices were not for nothing. Soon after that, more copies of the Pale Lady approached him from the shadows. Grant understood now, and LeBlanc didn't even need to point out the empty tomb next to Hadrian's. Grant was ready to give his noble blood for the Pale Lady. With that, LeBlanc cast a quick spell, marking Grant with the sigil of the Black Rose. Now that was the complete base story of LeBlanc. I say base story because if you want to learn more about her actions during other events, we have 2 more older videos with stories where the Pale Lady played a role. There is Swain's complete story, and there is also a story called The Principles of Strength. Now, as we mentioned, the story of LeBlanc and Mordekaiser are connected, and because we wouldn't get a better chance to get into the newest story of Mordekaiser, let's quickly have a look at that too. The new story isn't the longest, but it is interesting because it jumps between different times in Mordekaiser's life. The first bit depicts Mordekaiser after he was sealed away by LeBlanc. He was now in his own realm, the afterworld he created, the Mitnaraknun as it was called there. Once it was utterly empty, but now Mordekaiser walked down the path of the fortress he built using the souls of his victims. It was a massive construction of cruel magic and iron will. The next scene then takes us to the moment San Uzal died the first time. It took him a second to realize that he was dead. For a moment he felt sadness in his heart, but then he laughed. Death was what he lived for. He looked around and scanned the distance for the Grand Gateway of Souls that would lead him to the Hall of Bones. But there was nothing but fog and fine sand as far as he could see. Time passed as he endlessly searched around. None of this made sense to him. Soon, confusion melted into disbelief. Disbelief kindled anger. and anger flared into fury. He wasn't sure if the priests lied, if they were false prophets, or if his ancestors simply made an error of judgment. Then he realized none of it mattered. What mattered was the here and now. He conquered the wildlands, led the tribes and built an empire. He conquered all that would oppose him, and death would be no different. The next scene takes us to the moment San Uzal was summoned back into the world. Blood spilled around as San Uzal, now known as Mordekaiser, approached the last surviving mage. It required the power of 13 mages to bring the legendary San Uzal back. The last mage tried to stop the Revenant with a fireball of blue flame. It fully engulfed Mordekaiser, but it did not stop him. In fact, Mordekaiser took the hit to protect a book known as the Tome of Spirits from the flames. It was another piece of knowledge for his plans. Mordekaiser lifted nightfall, and with a satisfying crash, the 13th mage joined the rest. In the last scene, Mordekaiser was back in the throne room of his afterworld. Powerful undead warriors lined the sides of the room, but none of them dared to speak. Only the wailing of weaker spirits lingered in the air. To Mordekaiser, these tormented voices were like music, and they were the loudest near the throne itself. Mordekaiser approached the throne to appreciate the fine work. This single part took more souls to craft than any other piece in the Bastion. A moment later, with nightfall in hands, he obliterated the throne, and hundreds of souls echoed in the Great Hall as they all vanished. Now, surrounded only by the strongest of his generals, he was ready for his final reign. He walked out of the Great Hall and towards the heart of his fortress. In its center there was a relic that tied Mitnaraknun to the mortal realm. A relic that was tied to the heart of the immortal Bastion. I am actually glad that we covered this story together with LeBlanc, because I think it is obvious that the Well of Death inside Noxus is the gateway to Mordekaiser's realm. The question is, how big of a storyline can this become? And will Riot be able to bring Mordekaiser back without destroying half of Valoran? One thing is certain though. You're all playing chess right now, aren't you? Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have neat mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.